The 2024 Polygon Bend R9X is advertised as an endurance gravel bike, but I'm not entirely convinced that you can call it a gravel bike, at least by today's standards. Now, yes, certainly gravel bikes exist on a spectrum, ranging from very road-centric to practically mountain bikes. But this Polygon Bend has a SRAM 1x12 electronic drivetrain, an electronic dropper seat post, and a really slack front end. Seems that all that's missing is a suspension fork and a flat handlebar, and you might mistake it for a proper XC bike. In this video, all the things that I like about this beast of a gravel bike, and the few things that I might change about it as well. So for starters, the Polygon Bend series has recently been totally revamped from the previous design. The new Bend lineup consists of 3 models, the R7, the R9X, and the V9X, ranging in price from $1,400 up to $3,400 US. Now there's also a Bend R2 option, but I do believe that that's an entry-level carryover from the previous iteration. It doesn't quite fall into the same category as the 3 I just mentioned. Now the demo unit that I have here is the middle of the range R9X, which retails for $2,800 US right now on Bikes Online, but I do believe is normally priced at $3,000 US. Now, all of the models in the Bend lineup feature an alloy frame, and the R7, along with this R9X, feature a rigid carbon fork, with the top-tier V9X featuring a Fox suspension fork with 40 millimeters of travel. The wheels on the R9X are a Novatec wheel, but they do feature carbon rims with a generous 24 millimeter inner rim width, and they are surprisingly light at under 1,600 grams for the pair. They come pre-taped and ready to be converted to tubeless with the included valve stems. And for anyone wondering, the complete bike in a size medium without pedals comes in at about 22.8 pounds or about 10.3 kilograms on our scale. And the frame will take up to a 700 by 50 millimeter tire, but honestly I think you can fit a much wider tire on here if you want. Now like I said, the R9X has a SRAM Access Explorer 1x12 electronic drivetrain with a 40-tooth chainring on the rival crankset and a 10-44 12-speed cassette in the back. A nice touch in my opinion is that the crank length is actually size specific, with small and medium frames getting an appropriately sized 165 millimeter crank and large and extra large frames getting a 170 millimeter crank. Now the bike also comes stock with an electronic access reverb dropper post with 75 millimeters of travel, which I must say is pretty wild to see stock on a gravel bike. The brakes are SRAM Rival hydraulic disc brakes with a 140 millimeter rotor in the back and a 160 millimeter rotor up front. Now the tires are supplied by V Tire Company, and they're the Rocket Man 700 by 44 millimeter knobby tires, and they are tubeless ready. Now the handlebars are also size specific, with small and medium frames getting a 42 centimeter bar and large and extra large frames getting a 44 centimeter bar. Now the finishing kit, which consists of the bars, the stem, and the saddle, are furnished by Polygon's in-house brand Entity. Okay, so I think that's all the relevant specs. Let's talk about the geometry. Now one of the reasons that I feel like this bike really blurs the lines between gravel and XC is in the geo. Now let's just take a quick look here at the Bend versus the Blackheart all-road bike that I've been riding a lot lately. Pretty wildly different numbers, even though these are both considered gravel bikes to some degree. Now the wheelbase on the Bend is 52 millimeters longer than the Blackheart, and the stack on the Bend is 38 millimeters taller than the Blackheart, which in and of themselves makes it feel like a totally different type of bike. And then you have the head tube angle and the resulting trail figure. The Bend has a 69.5 degree head tube angle, and combined with the low offset fork yields a trail figure of 85.5 millimeters. Now for reference, typical gravel bikes have trail figures that generally fall within the low 60 to low 70 millimeter range, and typical hardtail mountain bikes have trail numbers roughly between 85 and 115 millimeters. So that should really give you an idea of how stable the Bend is at speed. And it's one of the main reasons that I place the Bend at the extreme end of the gravel spectrum. And save for a longer reach and higher bottom bracket, the Bend nearly steps into XC bike territory. So then how does the bike actually ride? Well, I suppose this should come as no surprise, but it does really well off-road, especially when the terrain gets rowdy. It just has that kind of roll over everything stable handling feel of a true mountain bike, but with drop handlebars. And also, this is the first time that I've actually ridden a gravel bike with a dropper post, which also really added to that sensation that I was riding a mountain bike. So it does really well on the descents, and on flat fire roads, the bike motors along nicely, but on the climbs, I felt like I struggled a bit for 2 main reasons: the gearing and the rider's position. So the gearing maxes out at a 44-tooth big cog, and paired to the 40-tooth chainring, it's just a little bit less low end than I'm used to. Now on my Outback, for instance, I run a 40-tooth chainring and a 50-tooth big cog. Now I should point out that on the next tier higher, the Bend V9X, you do get the same 40-tooth chainring up front, but is paired with a SRAM GX Eagle 10 to 52 tooth cassette for some seriously low climbing gears. And then of course there's the riding position. The stack on the Bend is super tall at 624 millimeters, but the reach is actually fairly short, which makes the riding position very upright, which is great for all-day comfort and handling rowdy descents, but it does make the climbing a bit more challenging than necessary. Now, the tires do really well off-road. They never made me question the grip, and they're pretty predictable when things get kind of washy. But again, there's always compromises, and for a tire that excels off-road, it usually means that it's going to be slow on pavement, which does seem to be the case here. It just seems to take a lot more effort to hold speed on the road than with a lighter, smoother tread tire, which I suppose is pretty obvious, but should be noted nonetheless. Okay, so it's pretty clear that the Bend is a great off-road bike. However, I do think that there are a few relatively easy things that I would probably change if I got this bike for myself. Now, the first is that the reach on the bike is already pretty short with respect to its stack, so I was kind of surprised to see that it comes with such a short stem. Now, at 45 millimeters in length, it's basically a mountain bike stem, and again, it falls in line with the idea that this bike kind of blurs the line between gravel and XC. However, it does make the bike feel a little bit cramped, and I think that a slightly longer stem, maybe 70 or even a 90 millimeter stem, would really help to balance the feel a bit more and probably make climbing a little bit easier. Now, the handlebars do have a decent flare to them, 16 degrees to be exact, but for this aggressive a bike, I'd expect slightly wider bars to match. The stock 42 centimeter bars do feel a little bit too narrow for this particular bike. Now, the website also talks up the super padded bar tape, meant to absorb lots of energy over rough terrain, but for me personally, there's just way too much bar tape on these handlebars. Now, sure, it may absorb more shock than regular tape. For me personally, it starts to affect my grip on the bars and almost makes it harder to hold on to when things get really chunky. And then there's the tires. Now, I'm not exactly sure why the bike feels so slow on pavement, but I'd bet that it has something to do with these V Rocketman tires, which again do a really good job off-road, but they do feel upsettingly slow on pavement. Now, these are all pretty easy fixes, and in a future video I'll update you once I replace some of the parts on this bike. Now, I've had a pile of parts from Ritchey that I've been meaning to test and review for a couple of months now, and I actually think that the Bend is a perfect place for all of them. Now, I've got the Ritchey Corralitos bar here in, I think it's a 46 centimeter width. Now, these are really wide and shallow with a nice 24-degree flare to them, perfect for this bike in my opinion. And then I also have a longer stem that I'm going to put on as well. This one in particular is a 70 millimeter length. And then lastly, I've got these Ritchey Speedmax tires in 700 by 40 millimeters that I really wanted to test out on the Blackheart All-Road, but when I mounted them up, they actually measured closer to 43 millimeters in width, and they just wouldn't fit the rear of that frame. Now, at first glance, these tires do look pretty aggressive, but all accounts say that they roll way faster than they look, so I'm pretty excited to give these a go as well. Anyways, overall, this is definitely an off-road specific gravel bike. It does okay on the road, but it does feel sluggish and heavier than it actually is when you get out onto the pavement. Although I do think some of that can be forgiven once you actually hit the trails and you see just how capable the Bend is off-road. I would say this bike is for someone who wants a gravel bike for the pedaling efficiency, but also is not willing to make any sacrifices when descending. Again, it definitely blurs that line between gravel and XC, and I would say that it's maybe a solid choice for a gravel-curious mountain biker. Now, I do realize that I haven't even mentioned all of the mounting points on this frame. This frame basically has every mount that you can think of, and it's definitely got bike packing in mind. But with the dropper posts, I actually think that a seat pack would potentially be troublesome. Now, in a future video, I'll also showcase the Old Man mountain gear that I've been waiting to test as well. Now, I've done reviews for both their Divide rack and their smaller Elkhorn rack, which are both super well built and well designed racks that can basically fit any bike. Now, Old Man Mountain also sent me some of their new soft goods to test out as well, including the super robust Ponderosa panniers, as well as the new Juniper trunk bag. So definitely stay tuned for a closer look on those. All right, well, that's gonna do it for this one. If you have any questions on this particular bike, the Polygon Bend R9X, just leave them down below. I'll do my best to respond to as many questions as possible. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the channel. If you haven't already, I'll see you next time.